Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in again. I just finished up a bunch of fall yard work. For those of you down south, you're probably like fall. We're still 2 months away, but up here, a lot of our trees are already missing all the leaves. We've had really strong winds the last couple of days. We've had frost the last several nights. So we're in full mist of fall. And yeah, I just got done with a bunch of stuff, took a shower, and I was thinking about something that I had a viewer ask me, which was the stupidest thing that I've ever done to catch a bass. And I've done a lot of stupid things to catch a bass. Like I can think back to probably 25 different things, but there's one day in particular that no matter what is probably the stupidest thing I've ever done. In fact, the two stupidest things I've ever done. The one to catch a bass, but two, the stupidest thing I've ever done in a tournament. Both occurred on the same day. So I figured I'd give you that story while I'm drinking a nice cold beer, because after some yard work, I feel like that's a good thing. Today we're doing a Central Waters late for breakfast. It's a sangria style fruited ale. It's a nice, almost a summery drink, but I just did some yard work, so I feel like that's okay. And it's really good. So Central Waters, if you're watching, I could use some sponsor support, if you know what I mean. All right, so let's get down to this event. I want to tell you, it's kind of a long story, but I think it's pretty entertaining. So this was back in 2013, the first weekend in May on Sturgeon Bay. And for those of you who are not familiar, that sounds like that would be a nice event. Well, the first weekend of May, I think the ice had come off like a week earlier. The water temps, depending where you were at, were 39 to 42 degrees. So we're talking very cold water. You know, the first weekend of May up here, you could get 20 inches of snow. I mean, it really could be very cold. And in this case, it was a cold event. It was opening weekend of bass fishing at that time. And so they scheduled this event. This was the first event of what was called at the time the Cabela's North American Bass Circuit. It was the biggest regional team circuit that we had. And they scheduled the event to start on a Friday. Now, I had to leave Saturday to go to an FLW tour event. So my teammate, Jason Correo, and I decided we would fish it with the idea that we could fish Friday. So we practiced. We had an okay practice. And we go to the registration meeting the night before. And one of the things to do there the night before is to register for big bass as well as all of the other things for the event. But at that time, they were calling for the next day to have gusts up to like 40, sustained 20-mile-an-hour winds. And because I had to leave Saturday, we chose not to pay for big bass because we really didn't think we'd be fishing. We thought that my teammate Jason would be fishing out of his aluminum boat on Saturday because they had scheduled for a blow day if that happened. So we assumed we were not fishing Friday. I was pretty much packed up, ready to leave from Sturgeon Bay to go to my tournament down south. And, you know, we get there the next morning, it's howling, we're launching out of the ship canal. And at that point, that's a kind of protected area, but it's right next to the Coast Guard station. And the Coast Guard told, so we all launched, we're sitting there, and the tournament director said he'd make a call at 7 o'clock, which was the start of the tournament. And he gets on the loudspeaker at 7 o'clock and he says, I spoke to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard said that they would put a small craft advisory warning for the wind conditions that we had if it was sustained 20 mile an hour. And if we had the small craft warning, we were not going to be allowed to go out. Well, he says at that time, the Coast Guard said we've got sustained 19-mile-an-hour winds, so he decided to let us go. I don't know that that's a great decision, but in reality, you've got about 5 miles of Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal, which is a very large part of the whole Green Bay area, that was going to be very fishable with a northeast wind, which is what we had. So it was blowing from like Escanaba, Michigan, all the way down the Bay of Green Bay to the city of Green Bay. So once you got on the big water, it would be rough, but you could fish the bay. Well, we were, I think, boat 4 or 5 heading out. And, you know, being back in a secluded bay, we're hauling ass to get out of there. And we get towards the mouth where all of a sudden there's just these giant rollers. And, you know, I don't spear one, but I jump a couple of waves. And all of a sudden I hear a bunch of like rattling around in the back of the boat, and I realized that one of the power pole drift paddles that I had on my boat at the time had caught a wave when I came down, because I shot us straight up into the air. I came down and it broke one of the power pole pins in half, which I've never seen happen. So at that point I had to get off pad. I'm back there messing around to get the drift paddles off, and boats are passing us at this point, but everyone is pretty much getting to the main Green Bay section and turning around and coming back. Well, my big dummy self decides we're going to go for it. We had probably a 7 or 8 mile ride to get to the area we wanted to fish. And we ended up going in, I'm going to say 7 to 10 foot swells, the biggest waves I've ever been in a boat. And it took us about 45 minutes, but we got to where we needed to go, only because the waves were so big that you could actually drive up and drive down. They were that far separated. So it wasn't they were super compact. But having said that, it was not a smart decision. And what I mean by that is, had I speared a wave being several miles offshore, I don't know that we would have made it out of there. With water temps in the 39 to 42 degree range and the wind blowing in the direction as it was, we would not have been able to get to shore in enough time where hypothermia would not have set in. I think we could have had hypothermia I think we actually had hypothermia just by getting to our spot, because we got to our spot and we spent about a half hour doing push-ups in the boat. We changed some clothes. We ate some food. Like, we were doing everything we could to get our body temperatures back up, because every time, even though I didn't spear any waves, we were getting sprayed the entire time from waves as the boat was coming up, or the tops of the waves were just getting blown on us. So we were soaked by the time we got there. So from the standpoint of a decision-making process, that truly was the dumbest thing that I've ever done to catch a bass, which was to make that ride. I should have been one of the 100 other teams that decided to stay in the harbor. In fact, instead, I think there were like 5 boats that left the Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal. I think all the others were big walleye boats, so they were a little bit more capable than what we had. Now, we made it all safe. Everything worked out fine in terms of getting there, but like I said, we spent a half hour warming up. Once we started doing that, we didn't catch anything for a while. Now, at that point, if you're familiar with Great Lakes fishing, you know that the fish move a lot. And it's one of those things where a lot of times what you're trying to do is intersect them as they're moving from one area to another, because you've got a lot of current, you've got a lot of changes in water temperature, and you have a lot of bait fish that are moving around. So we knew, even though our starting spot didn't pan out, that there were probably good fish close by. So we started bouncing around. In the area we were in, you could kind of get around a little bit. I mean, we could check spots. I mean, there were probably 3-foot waves. There were some areas that were a little bit more protected, but it was fishable. And we ended up coming onto a spot where within about 20 minutes, we caught a large bag of fish. We had, I think we weighed just under 28 pounds for five fish. So those are big smallmouth. That's about what you need to win a tournament on Sturgeon Bay, to feel good about where you're at. So we left about 2 hours early. I mean, we only probably fished for 2.5, maybe 3 hours. I plowed water all the way back. We ended up getting wet again, ended up just, having an okay ride back. It died down a little bit, but it still was not anything that I would consider safe conditions when you're talking about water temps that are that cold. We ended up getting back to the ship canal, putted our way back, and checked in. And I think at that point, we felt okay with what we had. And in fact, it ended up turning out fine with respect to, we ended up winning the tournament, which was a very large payday. I think we won with contingency prizes. I think we won probably close to upper $20,000 range, $28,000, somewhere in there, which was fantastic. So the dumbest thing that I've done panned out really well in terms of catching the bass. But had I made a bad move driving, I think it could have been actually a life or death situation. So I'm very thankful for how that turned out. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the story that I had 2 dumb things that I did. Well, the second was we ended up catching a fish that was in the 7¼ pound range and one big bass. But because we did not enter big bass, we did not get paid for big bass. The second place guy with big bass ended up taking home, it's like an additional $3,000 or $4,000. So it was a very nice payday for big bass. So that's the only time I have never paid for a big bass pot. And it was because I thought I was playing the odds and that we weren't even going to fish the day that we ended up fishing. So it didn't work out from that standpoint. But being that I'm here to tell you this story in person, it worked out just fine. But having said that, it was the dumbest thing that I've ever done to catch a bass. And I would probably second guess myself again having kids at home. It was a dumb decision to make. But so to that day, I have another swig of my beer. And yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed the dumbest thing I've ever done. Please learn from that. Life and death is not worth catching a bass, even if it works out in your favor sometimes. So thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.